The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar.
In 1953, two boys met at a school talent show in Queens. By 1970, they were the biggest duo in music. Then one said something unforgivable. Not about music, not about money. For the next decade, they sang perfect harmonies on stage while refusing to speak backstage. One secretly recorded 30 solo songs behind the other's back. The other erased vocals without asking. In 2015, one called the other a monster in print. They wouldn't speak again for 9 years. This is how childhood friends became bitter enemies. Paul Simon was born on October 13, 1941, in Newark, New Jersey. His parents were Hungarian Jews. His mother, Belle, taught elementary school. His father, Louis, lived a double life. By day, he was a college professor. By night, he played bass in dance bands under the name Lee Sims. Their home was full of both books and music. Paul grew up surrounded by tradition, structure, and rhythm. Belle took him to synagogue. Louis took him to Yankee Stadium. Watching Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio wasn't just about baseball. It was about heroes. Years later, Paul would write DiMaggio into Mrs. Robinson. Donald Fagen once said Paul was the classic New York Jewish kid, one who loved music and baseball, the two things that often helped immigrants feel like they belonged. In 1945, when Paul was just 4, the family moved to Queens, to a neighborhood called Kew Gardens Hills. That move changed everything. It wasn't just a new home, it was a new world. The family stayed up late watching Louis perform on TV shows like The Jackie Gleason Show and Arthur Godfrey and His Friends. Paul saw his father go from teacher to performer in a flash. It left a mark. He realized music wasn't just sound. It was identity, performance, and career. The neighborhood in Queens was full of Jewish families who loved music and valued education. Paul soaked in every note. He discovered jazz, Woody Guthrie, and the gritty folk blues of Lead Belly. All of it shaped the way he saw the world. It wasn't long before he found a musical hero right in his school. In 1953, Paul was 11 years old. During a talent show at Public School 164, he saw a boy his age, Art Garfunkel, sing alone on stage. A girl whispered how good he was. That did it. Paul was hooked, not just on singing, but on the idea of singing as a way to impress people, especially girls. The two met again later that year when they both acted in Alice in Wonderland for their 6th grade graduation. It was just a school play, but for them, it was the start of a musical empire. Their voices blended like they were meant to be together. They formed a doo-wop group called the Peptones and performed at school dances and block parties. Paul started writing songs. By age 13, he had already written their first original. By 15, they weren't just classmates. They were recording artists. In 1957, under the names Tom and Jerry, they recorded Hey Schoolgirl, a song inspired by their obsession with the Everly Brothers. They wrote it by accident while trying to remember the lyrics to Hey Doll Baby. They scraped together $25 to record a demo. That was a lot for kids in 1957. But it worked. Promoter Sid Prosen heard them and signed them. Paul became Jerry Landis. Art became Tom Graff. The song hit number 49 on the Billboard charts. It sold over 100,000 copies. They even got a spot on American Bandstand. At just 15, they were famous. But beneath the surface, trouble was already brewing. Even then, Paul was doing more than singing. He had written their first song, The Girl for Me, when he was just 12 or 13. His father even wrote out the lyrics and chords, and that paper now sits in the Library of Congress. Art had the better voice. Paul had the pen and the ambition. That imbalance, Paul creating, Art performing, was there from the start. And it was only going to get worse. Between 1957 and 1964, Paul lived a secret musical life. While still working with Art, he also recorded over 30 songs under fake names: Jerry Landis, Paul Kane, and True Taylor. He worked across multiple labels: Amy, Big, Hunt, King, Tribute, and Madison. This wasn't just a hobby. Paul was quietly building a solo career behind Art's back. He wasn't just recording his own songs, he was writing and producing for others. By 1962, he was working for Amy Records and producing songs for Dottie Daniels, The Vells, and Richie Cordell. His first solo single as True Taylor came out in 1958. That means he was already planning his own career just months after the success of Hey Schoolgirl. The real damage came when Sid Prosen approached Paul directly, offering him solo deals, without telling Art. Paul didn't mention it. Art found out later, and it broke him. He later said the betrayal shattered their friendship. He never forgave it. While Art still believed in their duo, Paul was preparing an escape. That hurt. A lot. Especially because Tom and Jerry were struggling to repeat their first hit. Paul didn't wait. He moved on. Art only realized what was happening when it was too late. Paul's success without Art made things worse. In 1962, with a new group called Tico and the Triumphs, Paul scored a modest hit with Motorcycle. It reached number 99 on the Billboard charts. At the same time, he released The Lone Teen Ranger under Jerry Landis. It charted at number 97. These were small wins, but they proved Paul didn't need Art to succeed. The Tico and the Triumphs project revealed Paul's calculating side. Though another singer named Marty Cooper was the face, Paul sang lead on the song that charted. He was pulling strings behind the scenes while keeping his solo identity separate. This confirmed what Paul already believed. He could make it alone. That made his earlier betrayal feel even more strategic. He wasn't just branching out. He was replacing Art without telling him. In 1958, they split. It wasn't dramatic at the time. They just drifted, but the damage was deep. They didn't reconnect until 1963, 5 full years. During that time, Paul released more than 30 songs under various names. Art tried to make music too, but without Paul's network or drive, he didn't get far. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel didn't reunite in 1963 because they missed each other. They were desperate. By 1963, Paul was barely hanging on. He worked for a music publisher, cold calling labels to pitch songs. One of his songs, He Was My Brother, caught the attention of Columbia Records producer Tom Wilson. But Wilson didn't want Paul. He wanted the song for a British group. So Paul made a bold move. He convinced Wilson to give him and Art one studio audition. They sang The Sound of Silence. Wilson, who'd worked with jazz legends like Miles Davis, was stunned. He loved Paul's lyrics and Art's clear voice. That one audition got them a real contract. For the first time, they used their real names. But their troubles were just beginning. Their debut album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., was a total failure. Released in October 1964, it sold just 1,000 copies in 8 months. The folk sound they leaned on was suddenly outdated. The Beatles had changed everything. Columbia tried to market them as part of the old folk tradition, at the worst possible time. The reviews were weak. The sales were worse. The duo split again. Paul ran off to England. He played tiny clubs. He even recorded a solo album there called The Paul Simon Songbook. Meanwhile, Art stayed in New York and went back to school at Columbia University. They didn't know it, but the songs Paul wrote during this lonely exile would later become part of their future hits. Then, something crazy happened. In 1965, without telling them, producer Tom Wilson added electric guitars and drums to The Sound of Silence. He did it right after Bob Dylan's like a Rolling Stone sessions. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't tell them. He just released it. And it worked. The remixed version started playing on radios in Boston and Florida. Simon found out the wildest way, reading Billboard magazine while performing in Denmark. The song hit #1 on January 1st, 1966. Paul was stunned. Art called to celebrate, but Paul was shocked by the remix. He hated the rhythm changes. Still, it was a hit, so they rushed back together to record a new album to ride the wave. But something had changed. By 1966, Paul wanted full control. While recording Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, he took over everything. He controlled the instruments, he controlled the sound, he spent months in the studio. Many songs came straight from his time in England. Garfunkel mostly showed up to sing. That was it. The album became a huge success. It hit #4 on the Billboard chart and sold millions. But Paul started seeing himself as the genius behind it all. And Art was just the voice. That imbalance would only grow worse. Then came The Graduate. Director Mike Nichols used their music in the 1967 film. It made them household names. Mrs. Robinson wasn't even finished when the film came out, but it became a massive hit. The soundtrack went to #1. Their next album, Bookends, helped them stay at the top of the charts for 16 weeks. They won Record of the Year at the Grammys. But with success came cracks. Paul felt like people were giving Art too much credit. Fans assumed Art had written the songs. Paul was the writer, but Art was the one getting the applause. Their manager said it best. They both envied the other. To make things worse, Paul was insecure. Art was taller, more photogenic, and Paul never forgot the time Art joked, "I'll always be taller than you." That stung for decades. Then came the final blow. Mike Nichols asked them to act in Catch-22. Both were cast, but Paul's role got cut. Only Art remained in the film. Paul was humiliated. Art went off to Mexico to shoot the movie. Paul stayed in New York. That separation cracked everything wide open. Paul had expected them to keep working on music. Instead, Art was gone for months. What should have been 6 weeks turned into a year. Their album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, had to be recorded in 2 long sessions, one in November 1968 and another a full year later. In between, Paul waited and stewed. Woodstock came and went. They couldn't perform. Art was still filming. Paul tried to keep working, but it was never the same. Their creative process had always been built on real-time feedback, 2 voices in the same room. Now, Art wanted Paul to send tapes to Mexico. Art would call back with changes. "No, that part's no good," he'd say. Paul felt like a junior employee. It was degrading. It was never supposed to be like this. Then Art said something that ended everything. He told Paul, "Here's how it'll be. I'll make movies for 6 months, then come back, and you'll have written the songs, and we'll do the album." Paul's answer was short. "No, that's not gonna happen." He wasn't just rejecting a plan. He was rejecting the whole idea of being someone's hired songwriter. Paul had always written the songs, run the sessions, crafted the sound. But Art was the one fans cheered for. At live shows, when Art sang Bridge Over Troubled Water, the crowd went wild. Paul would stand in the background thinking, "That's my song, man." The final sessions for Bridge Over Troubled Water were lonely. Paul was alone with the band and the producer. Art was in Mexico. Even the instruments for the title track were recorded in California, just to make it easier for Art's travel. But when the time came to sing it, Art did it solo, and got the standing ovations. That album would become their biggest success, and their last. When Simon and Garfunkel split up in 1970, Most people thought Paul Simon would bounce back easily. After all, Bridge Over Troubled Water had just become a global hit, topping charts for 6 straight weeks. But deep down, Paul was scared. That fear pushed him to take risks. In January 1972, he released his first solo album, simply titled Paul Simon. One of the songs, Mother and Child Reunion, was inspired by a chicken and egg dish on a menu. But the real twist was the sound. Paul had gone to Kingston, Jamaica, and recorded reggae music with Jimmy Cliff's band. It worked. The song reached the top 5 in both the US and the UK. Another track, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, reached number 22 and proved Paul could still write songs that felt like stories. The album hit number 4 in the US and even topped charts in the UK and Japan. In 1973, Paul dropped There Goes Rhymin' Simon. His confidence was growing fast. He tried new styles, new instruments. The single Kodachrome hit number 2, using photography as a clever way to talk about memory. Then came Loves Me Like a Rock, which topped the Cashbox charts. He brought in the gospel group Dixie Hummingbirds for backing vocals, something he'd never done before. The song American Tune wasn't a big chart hit, but it touched a nerve. It borrowed a melody from Bach and captured the country's post-Vietnam sadness in just a few verses. That album hit number 1 on Cashbox. 2 years later, in 1975, Paul released Still Crazy After All These Years. This was his darkest work yet. He had just divorced Peggy Harper, and the songs were full of heartache and doubt. But it was a hit. The album reached number 1 on Billboard, won Album of the Year at the Grammys, and earned Paul the award for Best Male Pop Vocal. The biggest track? 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. It spent 3 weeks at number 1 in early 1976. That same album also had My Little Town, a surprise reunion with Art Garfunkel that climbed to number 9. But Paul's personal life was far from stable. In 1983, he married Carrie Fisher, the woman known to the world as Princess Leia. Their relationship was a whirlwind. They met during the Star Wars craze and quickly fell for each other. But marrying during his reunion tour with Garfunkel proved to be a huge mistake. In a 2024 documentary, Paul looked back and said the marriage was exhausting. Carrie lived in the spotlight. She understood fame. Paul didn't. She played the media like a game, and Paul just wasn't built for it. Their marriage lasted just 11 months, but it left a mark. Both were reaching career highs. Paul was back in the spotlight. Carrie was still at the center of Hollywood. Even Lorne Michaels, Paul's best man, said the marriage felt like a storm. Fame surrounded them constantly. Paul later admitted that Carrie's world wore him down. Her mood swings, her addictions, and her love for the public eye. It was all too much. He said he felt like life had turned into a media circus. That emotional chaos seeped into Paul's music. His 1983 album Hearts and Bones flopped commercially, even though critics loved it. The songs were deep, personal, and raw. But audiences didn't connect. At least, not then. Looking back, it's clear he was unraveling inside. Meanwhile, the wealth and fame created more problems. Their marriage lived on private jets, in 5-star hotels, and under constant camera flashes. Lorne Michaels said it felt like being trapped in a dream. But to Paul, it felt more like a nightmare. Carrie thrived in that world. Paul didn't. He felt fake, like he was playing a role just to survive. After they split, Paul changed. He married Edie Brickell in 1992, and they built a much quieter life with 3 kids. He stayed out of the tabloids after that, but controversy wasn't done with Paul. In 1985, he traveled to apartheid-era South Africa. The United Nations had a strict boycott against any cultural exchange with the regime. But Paul went anyway. He spent 9 days recording with local musicians in Soweto. They worked under curfews, police threats, and fear. But Paul paid them $200 an hour, more than triple New York rates. Locals made just $15 a day. Still, activists were furious. Ghana's UN ambassador said Paul bowed to apartheid just by being there. Backlash came fast. Protests followed him in London and Birmingham. Musicians condemned him. And when Paul toured with Graceland, picket lines followed him everywhere. Then came a different scandal. This one about theft. Steve Berlin of Los Lobos claimed Paul stole their song. During the Graceland sessions, Berlin said Paul showed up with literally nothing and asked them to jam. They did. Later, Paul used that song on the album without giving them credit. When they protested, Berlin said Paul just told them, "Sue me, see what happens." Paul denied that. But Los Lobos said they got nothing. No credit, no pay, just silence. There were more credit disputes, especially from African musicians. Some defended Paul. Others felt exploited. South African jazz legend Jonas Gwangwa said, "So it takes another white man to discover my people." It was a harsh truth. Simon did pay above market rates and promised royalties, but many believed he still held too much control. Paul didn't back down. He said the music itself was the protest. He didn't write political lyrics because he believed the message was in the collaboration. He even said, "I didn't ask permission from the ANC." That made things worse. The ANC and United Nations blacklisted him. He was banned from South Africa and accused of breaking international law. In 1987, the UN removed his name, but the damage was done. Even decades later, artists like Billy Bragg and Jerry Dammers still protested when Paul returned to London. It all started with a surprise meeting in 1975. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel hadn't spoken much since their bitter split in 1970. But in a Los Angeles studio, while recording with John Lennon and Harry Nilsson, they found themselves in the same room again. Something clicked. The tension seemed to melt, and for a moment, it felt like old times. They decided to give it another shot, to be a duo again. They spent months in the studio that year. It felt like they were chasing the past, trying to revive the magic that made them famous. But it didn't work. After all that effort, all they had to show was one song, My Little Town. Ironically, the song ended up on both their solo albums, not a joint one. It was as if they wanted to reunite, but couldn't even agree on how to share their only song. It was a warning sign of everything that would follow. Then came a high point. On September 19, 1981, they stood together in Central Park. Over 500,000 people showed up. The crowd filled every corner of the Great Lawn. People climbed trees, sat on rooftops, anything for a glimpse. The concert wasn't just big, it was historic. HBO paid over $1 million to air it. The live album went double platinum. They raised $51,000 to help fix up the crumbling park. Old albums climbed the charts again. It felt like the world wanted them back. But behind the scenes, things were already starting to break. The success led to a world tour in 1982. That should have been their big comeback. But instead, it exposed just how badly they clashed. They stopped speaking. Not just arguments, complete silence. Every night they'd sing perfect harmonies, then walk off stage and go their separate ways. They weren't even pretending to get along. The songs sounded like unity. The reality was cold. They tried to fix it before the tour. Honest talks, promises, hopes. But once they hit the road, the cracks got worse. They couldn't even sit in the same car. Fans saw the show. But behind the curtain, it was a slow-motion collapse. In 1983, things got even uglier. They were working on an album called Think Too Much, their first since Bridge Over Troubled Water. Garfunkel recorded vocals for several songs. They planned it as a full Simon & Garfunkel record, but Paul changed his mind. He decided the songs were too personal, especially the one about his relationship with Carrie Fisher. Without telling Garfunkel, he deleted Art's vocals, re-recorded everything, released it solo under a new name, Hearts and Bones. Garfunkel was crushed. He had been there the whole time, helped shape the songs, put in the work, and then he was cut out. No warning, no discussion, just erased. He later called it a betrayal. And from that point on, they were done making music together. In 2010, there was one last chance. A reunion tour was planned. It was supposed to kick off in New Orleans. But Garfunkel suddenly developed vocal cord paresis. He couldn't sing. The tour was postponed, then canceled. Simon didn't take it well. He felt like Garfunkel hadn't been honest about how bad it was. The trust that was already thin finally broke. Garfunkel apologized to fans, but the damage was done. Even after he recovered, Simon didn't want to continue. In 2015, Garfunkel lashed out. That May, Garfunkel gave a brutal interview to The Telegraph. He called Simon a jerk and an idiot for walking away after Bridge Over Troubled Water. He said their friendship started in 1953 because he felt sorry for Simon's short height. Then came the line that hit hardest. That compensation gesture created a monster. It wasn't just mean, it was personal, and it hurt. The interviewer asked if Simon had a Napoleon complex. Garfunkel didn't hesitate. I would say so, yes. Coming from a lifelong friend, it was devastating. He even said George Harrison once told him, "My Paul is to me what your Paul is to you." The Pauls sidelined us. It wasn't just an insult. It was a comparison to another famous feud. And it made things worse. Simon stayed quiet at first, but when he finally responded, he didn't hold back. In a 2016 interview, he said, "We don't get along. It's not fun. No warmth, no nostalgia, just finality." He had moved on. By 2018, he was talking like a man at the end of his road. "I'm finished," he said. "I haven't written a new song in a couple of years." The old energy was gone. Whatever creative fire they once shared was now ash. After that, they didn't speak. For nearly a decade, from 2015 to 2024, it was complete silence. Not one call, not one email. Two old friends, now in their 70s and 80s, drifting in total estrangement. That silence only broke by accident, when Garfunkel ran into Simon's son Harper in their apartment building. It led to a reunion lunch. Garfunkel asked, "What happened? Why haven't we seen each other?" Simon answered quietly, "An old interview. You said some stuff." During those quiet years, Simon faced struggles of his own. In 2023, he released 7 Psalms, a 33-minute acoustic album he called his most personal work. But behind that was something more serious. He had lost nearly all hearing in his left ear. Only 6% remained. Doctors couldn't explain it. It happened after a bad case of COVID-19 in 2022, which also left him physically weak. He admitted he couldn't sing "You Can Call Me Al" anymore. "That's gone," he said. "I can't do that one." It was heartbreaking. A man who built his life around music, now losing the ability to perform it. In November 2024, on CBS Mornings, Simon said he felt angry, frustrated, trapped in silence, both in his ear and with the only person who had shared his rise to fame. A silence filled with missed chances, burned bridges, and a friendship that had once changed the world. They had started as 2 boys from Queens, singing into school microphones, dreaming of something bigger. And they had reached it. But somewhere along the way, the friendship fractured. The music stopped, and the silence grew louder than any harmony they ever sang.